Well, we are very fortunate now to welcome back onto the show Stephen Frost, head of production from Digital Eclipse, to talk about Power Rangers Rita's Rewind. Stephen, welcome. Good to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm still, I think we're all a little bit recovering from a busy, 2024.
Mhm.
And, we get that break, but as I think most people feel, the break is never quite long enough.
Never.
But at least we got a little bit of a downtime. And then, now we're just mentally trying to shift and prepare for um, the future, right? What's
Yeah.
happening in 2025 and all the exciting stuff that we get to work on over the next, 12 months. So.
And I will be picking your brain about that. But after having you on for Cowabunga Collection, Atari 50, gosh, making of Karateka, and I think it's like one more, Stephen. You brought backup with you this time.
I did.
One Dan Emmerich, content editor, Digital Eclipse. How are you, Dan?
I'm honored to be here. I didn't know you guys had like a thing. Now I feel like I'm crashing the party, as it were, but I'm doing
Any
fine.
anyone that crashes a party with that hoodie, you're good to go, my friend. You're
I
good to
wanted to
go.
be on topic today. I wanted to be on brand.
Well, there you are. There you are. As it were, of course, we're here to talk about Power Rangers Rita's Rewind. This was a game that I was so excited when I saw announced. I was so excited to play. I very much enjoyed it upon review. But one of the things I want to credit you guys at Digital Eclipse for doing is taking in feedback immediately. And you guys crunched before the holiday break and made adjustments for things that fans had requested, including speeding up gameplay and the like. You did that, and the game feels like a different game from that moment. I wonder if you guys could talk about the decision, one, to make such quick updates, and two, the effect on the studio.
Right. Yeah, I mean, just as a general rule, we always try to not treat the release date as a end date, right? It is a monumental date because the world gets to see what you've been working on for a while, and but we know that when we're working on these projects, even though we try to get a variety of people to play it, to check it out, and things like that, oftentimes you get too close to these projects and you make decisions with the best of intentions, or you make art or gameplay mechanics in a certain way that you feel is appropriate, and sometimes you're right and sometimes you're wrong, or sometimes you're in the middle. And so we always really consider this period of post launch time a kind of reflection point where consumers start to get it, they start to digest it, they start to think about it, and then they start to talk about it, right? And sometimes it's people are like, "This is great. This is exactly what I expected." Sometimes people say, "I had a different vision in mind, and this is not it." And then there are, and some people are more vocal than other people. Some people are nicer than other people. But we tried to take it all in, and Dan has always been a great piece of this puzzle because for a long period of time he would help man our social channels in a lot of ways and kind of relay kind of key things. And I think the important aspect of this, and it's always the tough part of it, is to not just immediately react to every single comment, because that I think would drive any creative person crazy. Is to really see what bubbles to the top, what consistent themes or trends kind of come to the top that you can glean things from, because you're going to get for everything. This guy says I want it blue, this guy says I want it red. Like, how do you fix that, right? So it's really important, I think, for all developers or anyone who works in a creative endeavor to obviously listen to the feedback of people who buy your products and support you, but you have to kind of pull out what the consistent messaging is and what really is the important stuff. Um, when we released this product, Rita's Rewind, out into the public, there were certainly some one-off kind of comments, good and bad, that are hard to action, weren't really consistent with other folks. But then there were some comments, and a lot of them that started kind of pile up a little bit about things like, oh, expectation of speed and movement of the Rangers is not exactly what I imagine is, especially with modern brawlers, right? If you kind of go back in time a bit and you kind of look at the era of games that we were trying to capture and do that arcade heyday of these sort of licensed IPs, maybe the speed is correct for that, right? But for a modern expectation, especially for a genre that has sort of been reborn in the last few years, and a many myriad of sort of brawler releases that have come out, sort of the speed and overall kind of fluidity of stuff has been amped up a lot to give the player that sort of sense of sort of being powerful and fast. And so we kind of took trends like speed and other components like that that really were echoed a lot, and not just in one place, but in multiple places. And then generally what we do is, Dan helps us start put down a list. We kind of compile it into a spreadsheet, and we sit down as a team. We kind of go through this and like, okay, what are the key aspects of this that seem like we should try to address or improve or change? What is feasible, because that's the key thing, right? We can't change everything. And I know people sometimes feel strongly about A or B, and they're like, I don't know why they can't change this, because it's not, generally it's not possible, right? The game is done and it's shipped. And so we kind of then prioritize that sort of stuff, and we kind of establish a time frame like, well, how long are we going to wait until we release an update to this if we're going to do it, right? So if it's kind of a title that might be like a Gold Master series or something like that, trying to get a little bit more feedback before we make changes is kind of crucial. So maybe a little bit more time is kind of plays out after launch. But for Power Rangers, that was a huge, like, from day one, like a ton of people bought it, right? It was a big release for us. And so a lot of feedback came in very soon, and we could see where that was going. And so I think the team felt it was important to really show the audience, and who's very passionate, as you know, any sort of major IP like this, the audience is very, very passionate, to show them that we are definitely listening to them and that we're trying to action on that, right? And so I think kind of coming out the gate and releasing an update like very quickly after the launch hopefully showed people that we were serious about making sure that we deliver on people's expectations for Power Rangers, that we're listening, and that we aren't doing a simple thing of like, oh, we're releasing a product into the wild, goodbye, we're out of here, right? And so I think the entire team was really keen on trying to get those updates out as soon as possible. Everyone worked extremely hard, as you can imagine. We did a lot of fixes. I mean, quite a number of fixes and changes in a very short amount of time. And it's only possible because everyone feels really passionate about this IP. They really want to deliver on the expectations of fans, and obviously our license holders and everyone else involved in this, right? And get something out there that shows people that we care, we're serious, and we're working hard to try to deliver on expectations. So I think everyone sort of took it well on our side and kind of banded together to do that.
It came out in 6 days. I think that's something that people are not expecting, because normally, even if you have like a, oops, we found some bugs, we're going to do a bug fix patch, it might be 2 weeks.
Yeah,
it might be 3 weeks. It came out so fast that I read conspiracy theories that we were holding on to this from the beginning and that we had actually finished it 2 weeks before. And I actually, I stepped in on Reddit and I was like, guys, this really, what you're seeing here is organic feedback being given to us that was useful. And we had a big meeting. And of course, keep in mind that Rita's Rewind came out in like mid-December, early mid-December, December 10, December 12, something like that.
December 10th, yeah.
10th, and then the update was the 16th?
Was the
18th?
16th, yeah.
Like that, yeah.
So it was the Monday following the Tuesday launch. And part of the reason for that urgency was we knew we had the holiday break coming up, and this game was designed as a co-op couch experience first and foremost. We want you to gather friends and family and have fun, and everybody can pick it up and play, and it feels like an old 90s arcade game. So we realized if people were really not enjoying the speed, the sort of elder 90s coin-op speed that we had originally given it, or if they felt that even though we had multiple difficulty levels, some of those difficulty levels are too challenging. I could use more health power-ups is what we heard a lot. So those things that Steven was talking about that bubbled up really quickly, we realized that would have a huge impact on how people played the game over the holiday break with their family and friends. So that was one of the other reasons why I was like, man, we're all going to get some sort of holiday break, but if we can push through and work really hard for the next 5-6 days, we can get it out in a reasonable amount of time for as many systems as we can get it out for. So yeah, it did hit Steam and PlayStation first, but Xbox was only a couple of days behind that. I think it hit like the Thursday
It was very
of the
quick.
week after. Yeah, so it was an unusual. Please do not expect that from us all the time. But
Mhm.
because the nature of what we could change and what people were having issues with, those meshed well, combined with let's do this before the holidays so that we don't lose everybody's enthusiasm. We don't want people to be disappointed over the break.
It was notable to me because obviously from the background, Power Ranger enthusiast, Dan, very clear Power Ranger enthusiast. And I know just my history with, having spoken with Steven so many times and the Cowabunga collection and such. I know that there is passion here, and I know there's passion on both ends for a lot of gamers, players, purchasers, but also reviewers as well. And it was interesting to me that in the launch version or the pre-launch version that we reviewed, I really did enjoy my time. I had a lot of fun. There was a lot of great there. And the things that I was like, "Oh, I wish this could." To have it within a week was unheard of, wonderful. Suddenly I can switch my Power Ranger, not on the fly because that doesn't make sense for the game, but like in the juice bar, right? Like going in there, little stuff, and it was like it just felt very I was very appreciative as a gamer because it felt like we were heard, but not I don't feel like it did not on my end, Dan. It didn't feel toxic. It didn't feel that way. I hope it didn't for you guys.
I
Well,
mean,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead,
Go ahead,
Stephen.
Dan. I mean, it's always the case. Like when you work on IPs, and I worked in Sonic in the past and things like that too. And Dan has worked with passionate folks too. And it's you thrive on that. You need the passion for people to sort of drive the excitement for these properties. But there's good and bad with that, right? There are people who are very protective of the IP personally. They have an emotional attachment to it, and they have very high expectations of what they see in their mind's eye for a product. And while it may not be feasible, they still feel very passionate about it. So, it's par for the course. When a product like this comes out with a well-known and well-beloved IP, there's going to be some backlash if people don't like a component of it, or there's going to be some heated people, or there are going to be people who are typing with all caps, and things like that. And it can be a bit tough, right? Because
Mhm,
the team, and I think I say this every time to every sort of podcast interview I do. It's like people have to remember that there's humans kind of working on these games and they're passionate, right? They're just like regular folks. They're
mhm,
trying to do their best. No one goes out and aims in any case to make a bad game, right? No one does. They
mhm,
put their heart into it. They put their souls into it. They have passion to it. They're sort of doing their best. So when you come on after a product is released with a big bullhorn and you're yelling like, "This sucks, you guys are terrible," that accomplishes nothing, right?
mhm,
It really doesn't. It doesn't encourage developers to listen to what you're saying and act upon it. It
mhm.
doesn't help the community at all. And it doesn't help any future developer who's thinking like, "Oh my God, look at the negativity that it can be sparked from an IP. I don't want to touch that IP ever again,"
Right.
right? So I just say to people, it's like, we have thick skin most of the time, but if
Mhm,
you work on a project for a long time, and everyone feels this way, like unless you feel this way, I don't think you've really invested into a project. Like you're going to feel attached to it, you're going to feel protective of it, and you're going to want to release it out in the world and get people to smile and enjoy it.
mhm,
And so, I just say to people in general, like, you get further with the kind word and kind of approaching things in these forums and sort of social posts and stuff like that in a meaningful and constructive way, right? You
mhm,
don't need to yell, but you can say like, "Hey, like I was playing this. Thanks for releasing this. The speed is a bit slow for my liking. I'm wondering if there's anything that can be done." Like that's a very different approach, for example, than like, "This is so slow. You guys suck. Like, why are you doing it?" Right?
yeah,
Like it's a whole different kind of thing. Dan
mhm,
had to feel, as I said, Dan has been involved with social for a long time and has to feel that kind of just that constant barrage of stuff like that. And we have to be the bigger people. We have to be
mhm,
kind. We have to be responsive. But I think the main thing that sort of comes out of this is that Digital Eclipse as a whole, and I really wholeheartedly feel this, is like we care.
mhm,
We love games. We are passionate about the things that we do. We care about the people who buy our products. We want them to enjoy it. There's a lot of just energy, time, and passion that goes into every project that we work on. And so we treat your comments, seriously. We
Mhm.
don't ignore them, and we want to act upon them. But just please, like when you talk to us in a relatively nice way, right, Dan?
Yeah, to be fair, a lot of the feedback that we got during that first week was entirely honest and quite polite. Or, just sort of like, oh, gee, I didn't expect it to be this slow. There are always going to be people who have bee in their bonnet. There's always going to be the people that feel like everything that isn't what they want it to be is some sort of personal affront. You should be ashamed. I love that one. You should be ashamed. No, we've been working really hard. We're actually very proud of what we did right.
Mhm.
But a lot of these things that people are like, this is garbage. No, it's actually something that might just be able to be tweaked. And even better, if you found a specific bug, and they happen. I like to say that
Sure.
games are made by people and people make mistakes. So you're going to find mistakes in games, right?
Mhm.
It's the nature. But we can often fix those mistakes
Mhm.
if you can help us. Like if you see something that we didn't see during development, which happens a lot, take some video with your phone. The engineers knowing how our layered systems, oh, this is the video part of the system, this is the combat part of the system,
Mhm.
this is the input part of the system. They can see exactly when a bug occurs in somebody's homemade video and go, wait a minute, I think I know what it is. And 2 hours later, sometimes they have a fix.
Mhm.
So there's definitely, as Steven said, like when it's very clear, it can be honest, it can be disappointed. Like you don't have to always just give us praise. But if it's like, gee, I was, is there any way that like maybe you could speed this up?
Mhm.
That's actionable feedback because it lets us know what your issue is, and you're not being a jerk to us
Mhm.
when we're on very little sleep and we've been thinking like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, we get this big game out here, it's going to be so much fun, and we see every release date as like a celebration, right?
Mhm.
So for when it turns into a nightmare, it's not fun. But yeah, we definitely listen, but it's easier to listen to some people than others because sometimes there's a kernel of truth in like this big tinfoil ball of anger, and it's like, hold
Mhm.
on, let me peel away these layers until I finally find, oh, they found a bug, and that's a bug we can address. So
Mhm.
please don't make us work hard to understand what you'd like to see better, because we can do it pretty fast sometimes.
Yeah. It was very cool to me. I think we are focusing a lot on the time between release and the update that brought with it changes that I think players were asking for. We're focusing a lot on that, and rightfully so in many ways. I want to praise also the amount of love and care that has gone into this game, because anybody that is familiar with Digital Eclipse will see the Goldmaster series. They'll see, the amount of layered projects that you guys do, whether it's going into the archives for Cowabunga collection, for the Atari collection, crafting new levels or game types in Atari and such. There's love there. And Rita's Rewind was not a collection. It was not a uh, laden documentary experience that you might get. I don't know what you call like making a
Yeah.
Veronica, right? But this game was new, but it captured the old. And that was kind of something that I thought was really cool. Very different in many ways and very much the same when you look at some of the previous work. You guys chose to tell a retro Power Rangers story, but a new story at that. Can you talk about the experience in crafting Rita's Rewind story-wise?
Yeah. So I am fortunate. I got to write it when it came time. Like the structure of the game had already been built. That we knew that we were going to riff off of Once and Always from 2023, the Netflix special, where Rita, Robo Rita, the reconstituted evil of Rita Repulsa, has access to time technology, and she starts pulling Power Rangers from different timelines. And we used that as a sort of a springboard and said, well, wait, if you had time travel technology, what would happen if she went back? And
Mhm.
Hasbro was cool with us. We pitched them. It was a process, but they liked that setup. So that gave us a certain amount of guardrails, but then lots of freedom because you can get away with anything. You've got a
Mhm.
sorceress who time travels. You got magic and science, forget it. It's like whatever
Mhm.
you want, you can make an excuse for. So the idea was to revisit the original season, the season one, and we wound up sort of capping it from the beginning of season one through to uh, the Green with Evil. The
Mhm.
introduction of the Green Ranger and Tommy, because that's the first sort of major arc of Mighty Morphin. So that became a really fun playground, and we were able to steal some things because we're dealing with time travel. Oh, let's pull the Tenga Warriors from season 3 because we can, and that seems like it would be fun for games. So yeah, I'm happy to say that like our creative lead May Livingston and also our chief technology officer Kevin Wilson, both absolutely monstrously huge Power Rangers fans who either did all of the additional research or just was like, no, I can quote that chapter and verse. So making something that felt authentic to the show became a really fun challenge. And the most rewarding thing along the way was finding out just how important it was to treat these characters with respect. As soon as I joined as the writer specifically on the project, Emily Chen, one of our animators, said, "You don't understand. You don't understand how important it was as an Asian young girl to see an Asian young girl on screen with Trini." And have that be like a role model. All of my friends were into that. And then I was demoing the game at PAX, and I had a Twitch streamer named It's Mastodon come up and say, "You don't understand." Like this was the first black male role model I saw on television. He wasn't in a gang. He wasn't in jail. He wasn't dealing drugs on some TV show. And I heard from more and more fans how really these were role models for, people. Had a couple people say, "I hope you're not going to make the script all cheesy like the show." And I'm like, of course we are. That's part of the fun of the show. But underlying that, like I made sure that I actually kept a numerical tally. Do all the Rangers have around the same amount of lines? Does everybody who has a favorite Ranger feel like they are accurately represented? Trini doesn't just translate what Billy's saying. Trini has her own lines where she is the answer person. Sometimes it's Billy with the joke, sometimes it's Zach with the joke, or so it was really fun to be able to do an alternate history. Our game is not canon unless Hasbro suddenly decides it is, but we treated it like this is an alternate timeline. This is a fun way to play with things that fans know and put it in the context of a game where the player knows more than the characters in the game do, right? Because the players are steeped in Power Rangers history. They remember this episode with Chunky Chicken. They remember this episode, with Eye Guy. And, the Rangers in the game are going through it the first time trying to figure out what's going on. And they don't know that the deck is stacked against them with 2 Ritas that now exist in the same timeline that shouldn't be there teaming up against them. So it was a heck of a lot of fun. And Hasbro, to their credit, let us have an unbelievable amount of creative freedom. We constantly gave them revisions of the script, but I think the only time I got a negative note was, there's no apostrophe after Morphin. But we're gonna do like crazy time travel stuff. They're like, yeah, that looks like a lot of fun. We can't wait to play this. And they were very, very supportive of us just making our own story from whole cloth, but reconstituting stuff that we knew fans had as touch points and were going to enjoy.
It's funny. You are commenting on things that I went through in playing the game that you wrote, because like there were moments where I'm like, why are the Tenga Warriors here, but not this or not that? Wait a minute, why is this? And then like I had to remind myself, wait, this isn't the story of the show.
Right.
And
that was considered early on, right, Stephen? Like an earlier version of this was, what if we retold most of season 1? And then as we got more into it, it got more of like, but we don't have to do a specific, because some episodes offered more gameplay opportunities than others, right? Like we got the roller coaster because we wanted to do something from that carnival. They go to the carnival once or twice, and Pineapple the Clown doesn't actually appear, but we had stuff like that where we had opportunities, and we just let the gameplay dictate what the action was going to be, and then the story sort of followed that. But yeah.
I think at the beginning when we were just starting, I had originally was thinking like, okay, well, we do greatest hits of episodes, but like, do we literally go through the episodes, right? And some of the episodes are well structured. Like the first episode, Day of the Dumpster, is very well structured as far as gameplay. It has like the intro of the characters, even things like, it opens up like they're in the juice bar, they're practicing their martial arts and stuff like oh, that could be like a training area, and I actually spent a lot of time like breaking down like a large number of the first of the episodes in the first season. But you also get to these points where like 70% of the episode is just talking and there's no action. It's like, oh, it's really hard to replicate this level. this episode in a game as a level because, well, now we're just going to have to add a bunch of stuff that wasn't in the episode.
Mhm.
And then that kind of led itself to like, well, do we really have to adhere completely to the episodes? And then
Mhm.
that's when we started talking a little bit about the time stuff. And we're like, oh, okay. Well, now what we can do is like, what are our favorite parts of this season and other sort of seasons? And what do fans like? And what haven't we seen before? And we can
Mhm.
kind of now make this ultimate experience that is unexpected for fans, right? They're
Mhm.
like, it may start out like, oh, okay, this is where Zordon and Alpha like find the teenagers and they become the Rangers for the first time, and then it like, oh, it goes completely in a different direction with different enemies and things like that. So I think what I've always been, very careful of, especially in the early days of licensed IP, is that sometimes you get a little bit tricked or feel that you need to comply with the movie or the
Mhm.
show like exactly, and then the player's kind of like, oh, but I watched this, like I have to play through it as
Mhm.
well, like we wanted to kind of just throw that aside and say like, you know what, this is going to be completely mixed up stuff. You're not going to know what to expect. There's going to be a eclectic mix of enemies and bosses, some of which enemies, are fan favorites, some of which are, you know, internally as a team we're huge fans of, and being able to kind of have that creative freedom with the support of Hasbro. I think everyone got, and the team got really excited and juiced because anything was possible on that
Mhm.
point, right? And it just made like the start of the project a lot more exciting, and a lot more, there's a lot more opportunities for Dan and other folks to kind of craft like a story that was unexpected, right?
Mhm. I found it really neat to see the simultaneous juxtaposition. That just sounds like I'm trying to sound smart. The
I love
simultaneous
juxtaposition. The
juxtaposition.
word juxtaposition is great. I love juxtaposition.
And
As
I
an
like
English,
simultaneous, so you're hitting both audiences here.
let's just talk. As an English teacher, you both made my day. So I loved how we were able to combine the classic fan servicey. Clearly, we love these Rangers and these scenarios. There was a lot of cool fan service, quiet moments in the background of things, but also we saw new enemies or modified versions of enemies. I'm thinking about some of the putties, that big putty.
Right,
There were cool moments like that where they were simultaneously juxtaposed to one another. And I
right.
thought that was very cool to think. And I'm curious, how early on did that happen? Did you have to clear these new putties with Hasbro and such?
Yeah, I mean, from a Hasbro perspective, everything had to go through Hasbro,
Hmm.
so that they can just make sure, like, yeah, this is sort of relatively in relation to the brand is okay, right? It makes sense. And obviously, we sort of reached out of some, out of the box a little bit, like even the bikes, right, which appear like in the background. Like originally we were talking about, oh, there was the shark bikes and it's the toys and stuff like that, but then it's like, oh, well, there's these other bikes that appeared briefly.
Hmm.
Um, they had sidecars attached to them, right, originally, which is so blasé and so old school, but it is what it is. Um, but having that ability to kind of not only pull fun stuff, nuggets from the episodes, but also try to come up with enemy designs that cater to the gameplay or cater to the level or things like that. And what's great about the putties is that they're fully malleable, right? Like they can be anything. And so it kind of allowed us to think a little bit about how do we make this a little bit more of an interesting experience? How do we add variety to the putty so you're not just playing the same putty against the same putty over and over and over and over again, right?
Hmm.
So we knew from the beginning that we're going to have the most obvious thing if you were going to do this is like there needs to be variations of putties, right? That's from zero.
Hmm.
That's the first kind of thing. And so we knew we were going to do that, and then we just had to figure out like, well, how far are we going to go with this, and how do we make the silhouettes different enough so that they're quickly noticeable by what they are, right? And the mega putty obviously is an easy one. He's a huge large scale sort of putty. But to answer your question, it's from a Hasbro perspective, they're very open to this stuff, and excited to see sort of the direction that we went in, and it also allowed just for gameplay variety when we were kind of putting together these levels.
Hmm. The so the gameplay of the levels to me was very cool because I wanted a traditional beat 'em up. That is something I love. I don't feel like we get enough of those. I really enjoy them, and it felt like I was playing an old Power Rangers game, but like all good new things that are old, it's how you remember it, not how it actually was, right? And
Exactly.
so having a blast, but then you all did something that I was taken aback by, and that were all the, I don't know what the right verbiage is here, but the in between levels where you were on the bikes, that was cool. But then to play the Zords in the way we did, I had never seen the Zords used in this way. We saw them in this Sega Saturn-esque.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's like the Saturn original hardware. I mean, the impetus for that is a lot of this pseudo 3D that happened in the arcades before real 3D, right, kicked in, before we got the Virtua Fighters and the Tekkens and all that sort of stuff that helped spark early 3D days. Or there's stuff before that, but fighting games really helped to drive it. But there was this semblance of kind of a fake 3D that Sega was really good at with their, you know, Space Harrier and Outrun and titles like that. Afterburner to a degree where it is using sprites and layering them in a way that gives a sense of 3D when actually there isn't any 3D there
Mhm.
at all, right? And we live in that era, and this is sort of why Power Rangers is the way that it is. And that 80s, 90s kind of heyday of the arcades, for those who don't know what arcades are, it's where you'd go into a location and there would be arcade cabinets lining the walls. And you would hang out there in the afternoon with your friends and feed quarters into the machines and play to your heart's content. And it was an era where arcade hardware eclipsed home gaming hardware for the most part. So there was actually a reason to go out to the arcades and play this stuff. But that era of all of us have like stories about growing up in that era, or despite whatever age we are, and the games we sort of gravitated to. But the whole idea of that period of time where people were creating new technology and new ways to interact with players, and 3D hardware was just starting to sort of come together, and this was right sort of before that. We wanted to really kind of capture that look and feel, and Mike Micah, who's our studio head, really started the ball rolling on that stuff by building a system that allowed us to sort of replicate that general look of that layered, sort of texture kind of sprite work that adds to the 3D stuff. And then we kind of went from there. But we wanted to have also this differentiator to a lot of the other brawlers out there, as you've said, Luke, that there's been a resurgence of this genre, but most have really stuck with just brawler, like traditional brawler stuff. And I always look back to the games that kind of combine stuff, like games like Bayou Billy on the NES and things like that, where they had a light gun sequence and you had a brawler sequence, and games that kind of mixed up that sort of types of genres and type of gameplay. And I think that's sort of what we wanted to accomplish with Rangers as well. It's like obviously the brawler stuff is kind of there, but what new experience or what Digital Eclipse spin can we put on this kind of experience and make it unique and fresh for people, right?
Being a very 90s franchise and dealing specifically with like the 93 era of Mighty Morphin, that led us to be like, well, what was hot in the arcades in 93? What was going on in gaming then? And this kind of gave us the opportunity to give the Power Rangers the arcade style game that they never got, but also never would have gotten, because nobody in their right mind in the arcades in 1993 would have taken a brawler and a vehicle based shooter and a first person punching game. Like you wouldn't have gotten them all together. But because we get the luxury of sort of revisionist history and we can lean into the nostalgia, we're like, well, this would have been the ultimate idealized 90s arcade experience that never could have existed, but we all would have probably, as you said, remembered, oh, this was the greatest thing. My favorite moment at PAX this year, demoing the game for the first time to the public, was, again, I'm going through my spiel for everybody. I'm answering all the questions. It's a brand new game, the blah, blah, blah. And this dude walks by and just looks at it and shouts, "Oh man, I remember playing that," and just kept walking. And I'm like, no, you don't.
No, you
But
don't.
I think we got it right. Like that shows that we hit that mix of this feels familiar, but it's actually fresh when you play it. And of course, we had only been showing the brawler at PAX. We weren't ready to show the super scaler stuff that we're talking about with the Zords and the Megazord cockpit area. So it was actually a really good canary in the coal mine. Like I think we're gonna get this one right. I think people are gonna pick up what we're putting down here.
I was in the Summer Game Fest YouTube theater. That's when I first saw footage. That's where I leaned forward because at that point in the show, I think I had rested a bit. I was like, video games are cool. And I leaned forward and I was like, no way. And so I know I was ecstatic. And, you guys kept us on bated breath for a little bit with some of the stuff you didn't tell us, like those Zord levels, but also the Green Ranger and stuff. And I have to wonder how much did you guys want to say or want to hold back through the course of like from announce to release?
Yeah, that's always a tough thing to figure out, right? And there's a lot of internal discussions about that stuff. Even components like the rewind mechanic, and I was always like, we keep that, and it's a nice like surprise. Or when do we announce the Green Ranger? Or when do we announce this? The rewind mechanic, right? The actual physical rewind mechanic, and it's just something you work out kind of with the team and PR and folks like that, and you try to craft a message where it keeps people excited because you're revealing just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And it was tough because, we did that first trailer for that was launched in the summer with Jeff Keighley's show, right, as you mentioned, and we weren't sure what the reaction was going to be. Like we were hopeful, but we were up to the last minute trying to get that trailer together, and just iteration after iteration after iteration because we want to make sure. You overthink this stuff sometimes, and sometimes you don't overthink this stuff enough. But it's just kind of like, what exactly does this sequence show people? What will they get from it? Will they be confused by it? Like, are they okay with this? And this is sort of the thing that I share with, and this is with any creative endeavor, but especially with video games. And this is the sucky thing about video games and video game development. Like, at least me, I speak for this. All I see in general in the products, the trailers, everything, are the flaws. All I see are the flaws, right? Which is why I say, and I've had to do this, which is fine, but don't create games on the IPs that you love because they may sour you a little bit because all you see in the end is, the failed parts or the mistakes or the bad decisions and things like that, right? People out there obviously don't see this. But I even look at that first trailer and I say, yeah, this, like there's stuff like that. But we knew that it would convey what we want it to be, which is like just action. It's got Power Rangers. It's old school, kind of as far as the pixel art kind of style. Co-op. There's you play the team, and so we had these key messages that we wanted to kind of get across. But then when it launched and the reception was so great, it just like inflated the team, right? Like the whole team had been working on this for a while with nothing, and that kind of hit, and the applause and the excitement was kind of amazing. We had so many people message us after that and like, oh my God, where did this come out? Where did this come from? Right. And stuff like that. So
were you caught off guard?
I mean, I can't speak for Dan. I always am. I'm pretty humble in what the stuff that I do. And so I always kind of go out there with like a lukewarm kind of like, I can see this potentially being well received, but I can also, again, it goes back to like, I just see the flaws and everything. And so I always kind of like, I think it will be received okay. I personally knew that Power Rangers were going to love it, I think, or dig it because it's been a long time since this style of game has come out for Power Rangers. We had a fighting game some years back, and the brawler was at that point when we did like 4 years old on Xbox 360, I think, or something like that. So I knew they were going to dig it, but like, is everyone else going to get it? Or is it going to be like, oh, it's a licensed game, whatever. But for me, when I saw like the live reaction stuff and people filming from their seats and the sort of the kind of applause, and the excitement stuff, that was nice. That's so heartwarming for me. Like it really, I just sat there for a minute and I was like, wow, that's sort of kind of amazing. I don't know what the experience was for Dan, but that was sort of
I mean, pretty similar. I expected that fans would hopefully like what they saw because it looked like it was going to be an exciting use of the franchise in sort of an authentic way. And the trailer builds where you start out with the brawler stuff and you expect that. But then later in the trailer, that's when we started teasing the Zords and then the first person cockpit mode. And so to see, I was surprised how many people after that huge event with, dozens of games announced, that this was my favorite game. I did not expect that. I figured it'd be like, yeah, and that looks like it'll be fun too. Maybe I'll check that out later this year. The number of people that I was not expecting the number of people to come out by saying like, that was the best surprise, or that was my favorite reveal, or whatever. So that it really did energize the team, but it also doubled down on every single fear we had, right? Like, okay, now we got to make sure that all those flaws that Steven sees are not the things that everybody else sees. So we had discussions about animation. We had discussions about, is this boss balance, and this, that, and the other thing. And sort of, it did kick us in. We were well into production at that point, but like everything came into sharp focus of what needed to still be done. And any lingering decisions were made that week. And then we were off to the races.
Okay. So then a weighted 2-part question for you guys. And I recognize that it's weighted. So you see this excitement, and tells you you're probably in the right direction. But and you see those flaws, Steven, but this is something you guys are making. This isn't a collection that maybe you're putting together or cleaning up or whatnot. Was that ever on the table with previous Power Ranger games to like clean up an older collection? And then when you were making this one and you felt like you were, putting this together, were you happy with the stuff that you were doing at that point in time?
Right. So the first part of that question, yes, we always think about the previous games and things like that. The original idea was, in the juice bar, there's arcade, which have original arcade games there now. The original concept is like, what if you could play the original 16-bit games in the juice bar or something like that, right? Or they were unlockable or something like that. Unfortunately, there's just some rights issues and other problems in relation to Power Rangers, as you know, the whole Saban, and then Hasbro, and just
and then Disney too,
and just a myriad of stuff. Then there's a whole thing about regional stuff, right? Because like Japan, there's Power Rangers is not Power Rangers, and the region. So it gets really messy with sort of the rights to the property, especially in that early Saban kind of era. We did, to answer your question, we did think about that instantly. It's like one of the first things, like, hey, all of us played those old games to get inspiration for this. Can we sort of include it? So I remember distinctly in the early days talking to Hasbro, like, hey, we would love to try to include these games if we could. It just didn't work out for a variety of reasons. So that is kind of sort of response to sort of the games there. As far as kind of like coming off of the show and the reveal announcement and the things that we were working on, and sort of if we were kind of excited about what we were doing or happy what we were doing. And I think, yeah, I mean, the thing was that trailer, as everything, it's like, it's short bits, right, of different levels. And so it was really now the monumental task of like, we need to get this all done now, right? It wasn't a situation where the game was like pretty much done and we were making a trailer of it. We were still in various stages of development, including like figuring out what exactly is the Megazord sequence going to be fundamentally. We had gone through so many iterations of that because we were trying to figure out, as you know, in past sort of games, the Megazord stuff is either like a fighting game or something like a quick time event, oftentimes is what it is in recent titles. But we wanted to say and kind of figure out a way to really do that teamwork dynamic. And like, that's tough, right? And so the early versions of, even at that state of with the trailer, we were trying to figure that out. And we had it working in a way where the team had to work together to decide what actions the Megazord did. So, for example, if you were going to dodge to the left, a majority of people had to dodge to the left. And there was a whole interface for like the helmets of everyone, and they would move or attack and things like that. And then you could see who was making what decision. And if there wasn't a majority or you chose wrong, then everyone was sort of penalized, right? That was our initial attempt, because you obviously can't have 5 people controlling 5 parts of the Megazord. Like, how is that even going to work, right? Like, Zach's like swinging his arm, and everyone's like, "What are you doing?" Like, you gotta rein it in a little bit, right? So that was sort of a first attempt, and we went through a lot of play tests, like trying to like, is this fun? Like, does it make sense? Do people know? And And we kept like iterating on it and iterating on it. And eventually that's what kind of landed us in the whole kind of pass the controller kind of experience where
Mhm.
we wanted to kind of capture and build upon the local co-op, which was the main focus of the game in general. But how do you kind of relive kind of that experience that you had in the past, which is that classic of people like round robbing or and commenting on like, oh, that was pretty good. You should have done this. I'm gonna do better, and that sort of like kind of competitive but fun kind of teamwork dynamic. And that's why the Megazord kind of evolved from what I talked about to the system that it is now in the current game, which is more of like, I'm going to try my best, but if I don't do enough, then you can help out and you can help out and you can help out, right? So I guess to answer your sort of question is like, that was great that we got that reception, but we were still in the middle in a lot of ways of figuring out what exactly are the components of this game and how does it work, because we wanted to make sure that we kind of nailed it as much as possible and that people understood it. And before I let sort of Dan riff on that, even like the Megazord case where we had events where people came in and played the game much later in the process, and we're literally staring there watching them play, and we're making adjustments to the game on the fly, right? So even
That sounds stressful and awesome.
it is sort of stressful, but it does like you get direct feedback. You're watching people play it for the first time, and you're like, oh my god, okay. It's kind of that classic movie. If it's a meme on the internet in so many places where like it's like the designer watching someone put like the different pegs into like a different shaped holes, and
Mhm.
they're like, oh, they put the round peg into the round hole, and then everything else just fits into the round hole, and they're like, no, it's just going in the square hole. So it's going in the square hole, but they just keep it right. Design
Mhm.
is that way, and so we don't view everything from every angle. We've been playing this game and building it for a while now. And so getting that feedback and adjusting it and adding a little bit more of a tutorial, for example, the tutorial that's in there came in at the last minute, some other changes happened. So it's just a very organic process. And, from that reveal to the end, we were just like moving at 150 miles an hour, trying to get stuff done and just trying to deliver on the expectations that people had externally, right? I don't know if you have anything else
Yeah.
to add to that, Dan, but
No, just that when a lot of people when they would see the game or they would hear about all multiplayer in the cockpit of the Megazord together, that was the number one question. Well, how's that going to work? And knowing that we had gone through so many iterations, I said, well, I can tell you 3 ways it doesn't. I mean, so yeah, it is an iterative process. It is a try an idea, see if it works, play with it a lot, sleep on it, come back to it. I am ultimately happy. I think the pass the controller concept where everybody feels like they're contributing to a group goal that's very much on brand for Power Rangers. Anytime that the story or the gameplay could go back to the concept of teamwork, I felt like that's the right way to go. So when the team did hit on this I'll do some damage, then you do some damage, and it lets you root each other on, or if your friends are different, make fun of each other when you mess up. However you're going to have fun is how you're going to have fun, but the goal is still for everybody to get a couple of shots in on Goldar themselves. And that's something that previous games had not given a group of people a chance to feel like they were a team fighting a giant monster. So I'm very happy with how that turned out. But it was a lengthy process. I would say it was several months of testing different concepts and then tweaking those concepts and then throwing that concept away and then trying a different concept. But you got to be open, like Steven said. You getting feedback from players, getting feedback from other dev team members, and just being open to what if it's not that, what if it's something else. It got us to a good place.
Earlier in the interview, we talked about Saban and Hasbro and Disney and all the different people that have had their hands in what's involved to be the Power Rangers and the Power Rangers specifically, not their Japanese counterparts. And so I'm curious, Dan, did you in writing ever want to perhaps experiment with that? Like we had episodes of Power Rangers where Jason wore the dragon shield or Zach wore the dragon shield. The idea of Billy wearing that, or one of my favorite moments in the game and Rita's Rewind proper, it's a Zord battle, and in the background on the back left pillar, you can see Tommy with the flute, kind of doing something. It's real quick, real subtle. You have to look to see it. I love that stuff. But did you ever want to like deviate even more and give us moments that in our wildest dreams kind of thing?
I mean, I personally didn't because I enjoyed having the structure of let's stick to this era of the show. We can sprinkle in references, and again, like May Livingston was very good about like bringing in alternate, other seasons, elements from the deep cut references in the mementos that you collect, the 20 collectibles. They are all super deep cut references to
Yeah.
objects or items from different shows. But
Finding
no,
those, by the way, I'm just going to interrupt you only to say finding one or two
sure.
of those. Oh my gosh, guys, come on.
We wanted to build it so that it was replayable, so you have a reason to go back once you built up some skill. But yeah, I mean, because we're dealing with 30 years of Power Rangers history, it is infinite. Why didn't you do this character from that series combined with that? It is almost infinite. So I didn't really want to stray too far. I found some comfort, honestly, in we can tweak these elements that and they are related in some way because they were the first 2 3 seasons and the characters, I know, I believe me, I heard so many fans say they've got to do this or else. Even when we did the reveal between the Summer Game Fest
Mhm,
and Power Rangers Day, National Power Rangers Day, is when we confirmed what
mhm.
many people had suspected, that the Green Ranger was going to be part of the game.
Oh
In
boy.
between that, oh man, I had so many people telling me like, I'm not buying this because the Green Ranger's not in it. It's like, slow down, man. Like, we enjoy the drip
Mhm,
too. Like, we want to have a reason to keep talking with players. And what
mhm,
are your expectations? Okay, we know you have the Green Ranger. For the record, the Green Ranger was always going to be part of this story and part of the game, and it was
mhm,
always intended to be an unlock, a reward for the player. Once you
mhm,
get through the story deals with Tommy's origin, and we have
mhm,
our own little riffs on that. But it's pretty clear. I even stole, straight up admit, I stole dialogue from the shows to make it feel authentic. And you're going to see references to lines that are famous or that fans remember.
It
But
was awesome.
that was always supposed to be part of the fun of like, we know what you know, and we need you to know that you know that Tommy says six fighting against evil, like that kind of stuff. So yeah, I wasn't really tempted to go crazy. May did bring up a couple of things like from the comics, which where
Mhm,
they've really done incredible stuff in the comics. The
mhm,
mega putties were inspired by the comics too. And she's like, I want to work this in. And then, of course, she found a really fun way to make a Final Fight callback, which I don't know if you haven't played Final Fight. It's one of the original Go Right brawlers. There's
mhm.
a reference to Final Fight that we do with the Mega Putties at some point in the game. And I had fun like coming up with some lines that didn't say the words final or fight so that we didn't get in any trouble, but
Mhm.
that fans, that understood the in-joke would riff on it. But if you didn't get the reference, it would still feel authentically like Power Rangers. Now, that's something like Zach would say, sure. So yeah, I can't say that I was looking to like, oh, but gee, let me loose. I already felt like I had a ton of freedom with, again, magic and science and time travel. And the first 3 seasons was what we sort of we said, like, let's just try to keep it to this era, to keep it 90s era, because you're dealing with 30 years of history, and it can get overwhelming for those of us that are trying to make the thing, let alone the people that are trying to make sense of the thing when they play it.
Right. And those Boom comics are very cool. I hope
Oh
people do
yeah.
go check those out. They're
Yeah,
fun.
they're great. They have these nice hardcover collected volumes of it now. If anyone's hasn't checked those out, they're really good, and just nice quality. And the art is great, and and a lot of the stories are very very good.
They treat the characters with a lot of respect, and
Bingo.
that's something that I wanted to try to emulate from the comics.
Successfully so, I would say, Dan, if you don't mind.
I,
Um,
I, I never mind. Feel free to continue praising my work. I will not stop you.
well, I will continue to heap praise, but I'm also going to do it, deceptively here as I ask what else you might have cooking, if anything. And that's I think a weighted question for those who might have finished the game, but also like when you're dealing with a fan favorite era, a fan favorite genre, and a fan favorite uh, franchise, people will always want more, right? You said the Green Ranger was always in there. Oh, thank goodness. But also, all right, what's next, right? Everybody wants to know.
Exactly.
And so I'll ask, knowing that you've been asked a lot, are there plans for more Rita's Rewind, alternate elements, DLCs, new games? So many things that could be asked. Feel free to handle it how you like.
um, so I
Steven's
will
like,
say,
well.
I will say that work is continuing on it, but we are primarily focused on improving the experience and still, going back to what we talked to before, um, listening to the fans and taking sort of the consistent themes that bubble out of that and acting upon them as much as possible. We were able to get a lot of fixes out quickly, but there are some things that take a bit more time. And so we're in that mind right now, or that focus right now, of still delivering on some of that fan, feedback and comments, and trying to do what we can within the confines of the game in order to sort of improve elements of it. And that's comprised into two parts. One is the gameplay side, which we're
Mhm.
doing a variety of things about that, which we'll talk about in the near future. So, just to be clear to everyone, we are still working on gameplay improvements and changes and adjustments and new things. And we'll talk about it later. And then obviously on the online side as well, expanding that functionality and adding some improvements to that as well. And
Mhm.
so it is, if I were to boil things down a little bit, it's really trying to encourage replayability of the game in some
Yeah.
ways. If I were to hang my hat on something, is to encourage that, co-op experience, but also like how do we get people to play through this again? What are the incentives to kind of do that? And then obviously for people who have not played it, right? Because we're only in the first like month and a half or so of the game's release, right? Just the
Mhm.
very start of it. People who are coming into it now or in the near future, how would we want to change some aspects of it so that it's even more user friendly and fun and engaging for those folks? So we'll have more details about that stuff in the coming weeks or so, and we'll share more specifics. But we can say that we are working on some additional stuff.
I'm going to take the weighted part of the question, if that's
I was
okay.
gonna say you're
You
frothing,
said,
Dan.
are there plans?
Mhm.
Uh, there are ideas, but I really don't want people to assume that we're like working on DLC or working on a sequel. We have ideas that we think would work, and some of those are based on fan suggestions. And obviously, the fans on the team are like, you know what? If we get a chance to dip back into this well, I'd love to do A, B, and C.
Mhm.
But I do not want people to be like, oh, they're gonna add White Ranger as DLC or whatever. We really are focused on making the core game as satisfying as it can possibly be. Naturally, when we said, here's a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers game. Okay, where's Green Ranger? We can confirm Green Ranger. Okay, where's White Ranger? If
Mhm.
you've played our game, and hopefully you will if you haven't, the story ends with the Green Ranger saga, and it comes to a very natural close. There's no real good way to shoehorn in the White Ranger, and I don't want to change that character or that story arc by just
Mhm.
saying, here's a character sprite. So yeah, I know fans have made it very clear what they would like to see if we get a chance to do some more. If we get a chance to extend this story or do a
Mhm.
whole new story, what would they want? What's out
Mhm.
there? There's been a lot of ideas internally too. But yeah, right now our focus is making the core game that is already out there as satisfying as it can be. I don't think it's going to be the leap in gameplay that you saw with the balance patch that came out in that first week and a half. But
Mhm.
there are significant changes coming, and there's significant upgrades and additional features that I think the players are really going to enjoy. They're going to want to go back and say, all right, let me revisit this again. Or if they had maybe didn't been discouraged by seeing some of the negative comments from like the first week reviews, now they're
Mhm.
going to be like, oh well, how have they patched it? How has it gotten better? I think they'll see that. But yeah, plans is the word that I immediately bristle at, because
Mhm.
if we had plans, we couldn't tell you. Uh, but I'm here to tell you that we're not currently planning that stuff. But given the opportunity, we would love to return. We would love to come back to this and do some more stuff.
So a final question on that aspect of it, if you don't mind, guys. How long does it take to make something more, right? Like, because you have to obviously go through Hasbro, go through the rights holders, go clear a story. If that's how you're gonna, if it's not a sprite swap or palette swap, not plugging in a Zeo Ranger or something, just to your standard story. If you are gonna add, what's the turnaround time given like modern realities of clearing things across licensing and such?
I mean, I guess it really depends on what scope you're talking about, right? Like, you're talking like a level versus a character or things like that. Uh, so, I mean, it can be months to half a year or whatever, right? Like, depending on what you're doing. Obviously, a new character would be less, but you still have a lot of work in as far as the frames of animation, right?
Mm,
Um, and but approval process, it's not crazy because basically what you do is you do a initial mock-up of like, this is the character, like is in a standard pose, and they're like, yeah, the look of that is okay, and then you do the all the animations and you'd video them, and then you'd show them, you're like, yeah, I feel the movements and stuff are relative to that character and things like that. So approval wise, it's not horrible. And this is the thing I wanted to kind of call out too in relation to Hasbro. I've worked with a lot of license holders in my career, and some better than others, but Hasbro has been really, really great. Probably one of the best as far as trusting us to do what we're going to do, and obviously they want to make careful, want to make sure that we're handling the IP in a decent manner.
mhm,
But they've really been just supportive, and really excited about the product, and really just letting us have fun with it. And so, I say to anyone out there, if you are interested in working with Hasbro, you should, because they're great, especially as far as the video game side of things go. But so the approval side isn't long, but it's more about like creating the art, right? Art, like a game like this, is really art heavy, and art takes a long
mhm,
time, especially this kind of pixel art at this resolution. Is the number of artists who can do this and who can do it at a decent clip of speed just gets lower and lower all the time, because there isn't much call for it in modern video game development for the most part, right? Is a very specific skill. During the early days of Power Rangers development, we went through so many different artists as far as trying this and trying this and trying this. And some people could get the style, but they just couldn't move fast enough. And some people were fast, but they just couldn't really capture the style, and the intricacies of what pixel art is from that generation, right?
mhm,
So when you sort of ask, like, how long sort of stuff, that's where the bulk of that is. It's really the art creation of it,
mhm,
and it's something that you can't go super fast on, because there's iterative, like a single combo, right, move for a new ranger or a new character. Like, what is that, right? Your discussion is like, what is it really, and how many frames and how long does it take to do it? So even a single character can take months and months just from building that out, and being happy with it and integrating into the game, and
mhm,
how that interacts with the enemies and things like that. So that in itself is a long go. And then in background environment, like if you do a new level,
Mm.
um, the actual backgrounds of the levels aren't crazy as far as how long they take, but then it's all the little foreground stuff, the little destructible items and the little objects that you interact with and things like that. That's what takes so long, right? Because you're just doing these big blanket sheets of the background stuff. So it's all the little you talked about, like, oh, the deep cuts of things in the background, and this here and this here. Like, those are the things that take a lot of time, right? To place and position and make sure that people see it, and all that stuff. So it
or
really just depends, right?
or slightly don't see it in the case of some of those sweet Easter
Yes.
eggs. Those were so fun.
Yes, yes. So that's the stuff that kind of takes. And unfortunately, with like, it's a very different art and different sort of style of stuff compared to like 3D games, right?
Mhm,
Everything is really manually done. Every frame has to be drawn, right? You can't just pose. You can't make a skeleton in a 3D model and pose it, right?
mhm,
It has to be individually drawn. So it's a very time-consuming task for sure.
yeah. Well, gents, I've kept you for far too long, longer than I had planned to, and yet I feel like I could ask you more. I appreciate your time. Would you please let people know what they can look forward to, both as Power Rangers, Rita's Rewind fans, but also Digital Eclipse fans?
You want to go first, Dan?
Sure. Well, as Stephen had mentioned, we do have some more updates coming for Rita's Rewind, so keep an eye out for that. We also have a pretty significant upgrade coming for Tetris Forever. If you've been enjoying Tetris Time Warp, we're going to have some improvements to how our original Tetris game within that Tetris retrospective plays. That'll be out soon too. We are working on projects that are expected to ship in 2025. We haven't announced them. We can't announce them yet. But if you were to go to, say, at Digital Eclipse on Blue Sky or Twitter, or at Digital Eclipse Studios on any of the meta networks, you would be able to catch up with what we're doing. And we post whenever we have something to say. We try not to harass people and or bother people with messages. We also have a newsletter. If you go to digitaleclipse.com, sign up for the email newsletter. They are very infrequent. But we make sure that when we send one, it has something to say and something of value, usually multiple things. So yeah, we are working on lots of stuff. And when we announce it, that's where you can find it.
Yep. Yeah, just to echo that and build upon it, a lot of cool stuff for this year. We're very excited about it. We're ways from doing any sort of announcements, but it's going to be a pretty exciting year for Digital Eclipse. And for Rita's Rewind fans and purchasers, please stay tuned for some news in the coming weeks in relation to a few different things, including some of the stuff that I talked about today about the updates in relation to the game, which we're excited about and trying to get out there as soon as we can. And lastly, I just thought about this for you Xbox owners. If you want to kind of see an early effort of ours as far as a brawler, for those who don't know, we did actually members of the team. It was a small team, but Jeremy and I worked on this a brawler for Space Jam, a New Legacy, the game. So it's a very short, free brawler on Xbox. It was released. I don't know how many years ago we did this. Now it was during the initial part of COVID. But if you're aching for like a little bit of a fun, short brawler, it's only like 40 minutes or something long, I think, is what it is. You can go download that for free on Xbox for sure.
It's exclusive to Xbox, right?
Yeah, it's exclusive to Xbox and it's free. You can just go and download it and have some and see, have some fun with LeBron and Bugs Bunny and team. And you can kind of see maybe some of the elements that we took from there and brought to Power Rangers. But it's fun. I just wanted to call it out. Since I thought about it. But yeah, thanks for having us on, Luke. It's always fun to chat with you, and can't wait for people to see what updates are coming out for Power Rangers.
I'm stoked for it. Guys, stick around after the exit video just so I can talk shop with you real quick. Listeners, please do go check out Rita's Rewind. I really had a blast with it, especially post-update. It's been an absolute joy as a Power Rangers fan and a Brawler fan. If you enjoy more of this content, please click the like button, the subscribe button, and support XEP and any of your content creators and developers as ever you are able. Have a fantastic rest of your week, everyone. Take care.